Welcome to Recovery Revealed. What's feeding your disordered eating? I'm Mindy Gorman-Plutzer, your host. Do you long to be more connected to yourself? Is your relationship to food a reflection of that disconnect? Well, my guest for this session brings great insight and expertise related to how we can manifest connection to self, how our ability to understand our feelings and the feelings of others is related to our compulsive behavior, and how our capacity to digest, absorb, and metabolize love is linked to the way we digest, absorb, and metabolize food. Antesa Jensen is an emotional intelligence expert who loves to shift paradigms through pitch-perfect truth-telling. She is masterful in the art of weaving potent and precise energetic transmission through eloquent spoken word and captivating moments of silence in ways that dismantle the intellect and pierce straight to the heart of things, instantly unlocking hidden potential and the kind of resonance and connection that we all crave. Antesa specializes in facilitating fundamental transformation as well as cultivating these innate human skills in others through her keynote speeches, uh, emotional intelligence workshops, expedition-style intensives through her company, Adventure Awake, and through one-on-one coaching. Welcome, Antesa. I am so excited you're here, and I can't wait to dive in.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
So I want to share with you and our viewers that what attracted me to your work is how you explore and bring to life the concept of awakening. Please share how you got here.
The journey has been long with many curves, but I will say this is what is alive for me today in terms of awakening. It's the concept of having an illumination in your life, seeing something as though you're seeing it for the first time, even if there is a repeat pattern at play. I think for me, one of the biggest ones in that regard was awakening to the notion that I no longer had to carry the burden of my resentment around with me everywhere. And you and I, in our previous call, we talked a little bit about recovery. So I know resentment's probably a part of your vernacular as well. The realization that that I was making an active choice for many years in my life to pull the past with me into the present and take different actions to have a different reality, to have a different experience in my life, to no longer premeditate resentment through lofty expectations without proper communication. And that was sort of the first turning point for me. And from there, it was just a very fun roller coaster of all sorts of new, exciting things to learn, like boundaries, like emotionally intelligent communication, how to express my feelings, how to create intimacy in my life in places where I wanted it and didn't feel like I was getting it, and how to pursue my dreams.
I loved what you said about an awakening happening, even though the behavior, the story, the thoughts, I forget the exact words you used, happened before. So in other words, you can have an awakening to something new, an awareness, a knowing, even though the story might seem familiar. It's how you react to it, how your relationship can shift with it through this awakening. Did I get that right?
Yeah, effectively, if you're gonna have an illumination, it's basically your ability to see something from a different perspective. That's the simplest way to talk about an awakening. You wake up to a different way of seeing the world. So it's very much like, you've been sleeping and you've been in the dream sphere, and then you open your eyes and you're in what we know as reality, even though the truth of the matter is that actually all of it is a hallucination when you look at it from a neuroscientific perspective. But when you are waking up from a consciousness perspective, it's that you're able to see your life as an observer or as a witness, rather than being totally wrapped up in I am my thoughts, I am my body, I am, all of these things that often result in a person having difficulty being able to bring in alternate perspectives that would help them that would have them feel liberated in every moment of their lives.
Exactly. And for many people who are feeling challenged by compulsive behaviors that they're repeating over and over again, it's very easy and familiar to stay stuck in that story and not be able to receive the gift of the awakening. So that's why I wanted to clarify that it is possible that we don't need to stay stuck in our story.
No, and you talk about compulsion, and I know that this is the a purpose of this whole conversation is around the compulsive behaviors around our relationship to food. And um, one of the things that you learn anytime you're doing any kind of recovery work, and one of the things that's always surprising for people, is that you can go into recovery for more than just alcohol and drugs. For example, you can go into recovery for overeating. You can go into recovery for love addiction. You can go into recovery for debt addiction. And one of the common denominators of all of that is what I consider as sort of the original addiction, which is our addiction to our thoughts. And that is, there's a beautiful, I think it's a TED talk, and I can find you the link so you can put it in the show notes for this if you want.
Sure.
Where the speaker talks to the opposite of addiction being connection and not sobriety. And what is true about that is that when you have a sense of connection to yourself,
Yes.
you no longer overly identify with your thought process. And your thought process is what drives compulsive behavior. And we don't realize that we're addicted to our thoughts because we have this, this external thing. We don't realize that people are watching the video. I'm holding up my phone. You don't realize that you're addicted to your phone. It's this external thing, but there's something occurring in that process that is internal, that exists inside of your own body. And so my focus with my clients, with myself as well, is to really remove the external world and recognize that you are the creator of your entire experience. And sure, there are things in reality that are real, that are true, and how we react to it or how we respond to it tells us everything we need to know about our spiritual growth.
Exactly. The relationship to self is reflected in the relationship to everything else.
That's right.
Yeah. So, what's the difference between emotional intelligence and empathy?
Such a good question. I'm so glad you asked. So I find it's a really important thing to distinguish, because people who know that they're empathic immediately assume that they're emotionally intelligent, and it's not true. In fact, most empathic people, and I say this as a very, very empathic person, very highly sensitive person, that you're not emotionally intelligent just because you can feel. Everyone has the capacity to feel. There are some people who have severely shut down their capacity to feel in terms of their cognitive awareness of it. So at the core, I really do believe that everyone has the capacity for empathy, given enough healing work. The emotional intelligence quotient is your ability to work with your empathy effectively. It's your ability to create connection and move forward in your life in a way that brings you success, being an empathic person in the world. And so ultimately, it's the literacy, it's the language that goes with the feeling that makes someone emotionally intelligent. I could be, like, autistic children are a perfect example of this. They're incredibly sensitive. Usually, the typical scenario of an autistic child is that they're hypersensitive to their environment. One could call them empathic because they're the canary in the coal mine. They respond to everything, whether anyone else notices it or not. But that doesn't make them emotionally intelligent, because usually what's also a trend with autistic children and adults is that they struggle to ask for what they need. They struggle with boundaries. They don't have the means to express what it is that they're feeling in a way that can allow other people to have some insight into their experience. Mm-hmm. That is what emotional intelligence is. It's an extreme example, obviously, but the literacy, the language to describe your experience, and also to sense that in another person, not necessarily to always meet people where they are, because that might not be healthy, but in order to recognize the power of a relationship dynamic and to be able to meet someone from a compassionate space no matter what. And usually, if you are not emotionally intelligent, you are riding on the coattails of your empathy and also the reactivity to the fact that you are an empathic person. And that is quite specifically emotionally unintelligent. It's you're living in reactivity all the time, which is a triggered or activated state in your nervous system. So there's quite a large difference usually.
Yeah, it certainly sounds to be. So how would that emotional intelligent quotient help one to understand their relationship to food? Because they'd have to understand their relationship to their needs, I suppose.
Yes, this is such a good question. And the thing that I want to say before that is clarifying is that unlike, it's broadly claimed that intellectual intelligence, or your IQ, cannot be changed. So what you're born with in terms of your IQ, you have for the entire remainder of your life.
Mhm.
Whereas emotional intelligence, you can learn and you can build through practice. So that's an important thing to know. So if you resonated with what I just said, recognize that you're a super reactive person in your life, but you don't want to be. You'd like to learn the skills to no longer feel like you're constantly at the mercy of your environment, which is true of a lot of people who have high levels of empathy. You can learn these skills, and these are the skills that I teach in my work with my clients. So that's the first piece that I want to say. The second is, in terms of your relationship with compulsion, if you're an emotionally intelligent person, that means that you're not you're aware of your response to external stimuli and internal stimuli. You can discern the difference between external stimuli and internal
Mhm.
stimuli. It happens in real time, which is to say something didn't occur and then 5 weeks later you get mad about it and you decide to binge eat, for example. That's what, like, you realize suddenly after weeks that something happened that you're really uncomfortable with, and then the compulsive behavior comes out to handle the discomfort in your body, rather than in an emotionally intelligent response would be to be with the feeling,
Right.
to potentially vocalize it. I know for me and for most of my clients, there's such power in being witnessed, claiming how you feel without needing an explanation, without needing a story, and without needing a solution to it. And in that sense, the emotion or the felt experience will resolve itself and evolve into something different within a span of minutes.
Yeah.
And that is what would have an emotionally intelligent person be able to um, be with their compulsive behavior in a different way.
Right. Being fully nourished means being seen, heard, understood.
Right,
So
exactly.
this really goes beyond the awareness of what's triggering us. Right? We can all identify what the triggers are,
That's right.
but it's important to awaken to, as you're so beautifully explaining, what our unique responses are telling us.
Yeah, and you know what? A classic case, and I have a background of closet bulimia, and I say closet bulimia is because if you had asked me during the almost 2 decades where I had patterns of um, binge eating and purging,
Mhm.
there is no way I would have ever shared that I was bulimic. I would never have given myself that label. So it's in hindsight that I'm able to see very clearly that I had very, very compulsive behaviors around food. And there's two entry points that triggers tend to happen when we are with ourselves. One is through our thought process, and one is through physical sensation. So one is psychosomatic and one is somatopsychic.
I
So
love
soma means body.
that.
Okay. So um, I had an experience once, and this was on the sort of the tail end of me starting to get some sobriety around my relationship with food in terms of how I ate and when and why and what probably is the most important, was the recognition that I might have an experience and I might feel bad about the experience. I might feel guilty or shameful or upset or hurt or like I deserve to be punished because I made a mistake. Those are all stories. Those are all thoughts. So that would be a psychosomatic trigger.
Okay.
And so if I'm telling myself I deserve to be punished, what am I going to do in my lifestyle that's immediately available to me? I'm probably going to eat food that makes me feel bad.
And creates pain in the body.
That's
And
right.
eating
So
beyond the point of fullness is painful.
that's right. It feels painful. And if I have a belief system that I deserve to suffer, that I deserve to be punished, that I'm bad, that I'm inherently wrong,
Mhm.
I'm going to eat in ways that perpetuate, which is to say, make it continue long before the impetus of the thought, or long after the impetus of the thought has disappeared. I'm going to continue to re-trigger myself by creating a physical reality where that's true, because that's the way that I self-validate my internal thought stream.
Right. Yeah.
On the opposite side of that spectrum are, and this is why I think it's very important to both address the mindset in terms of the thought. We think mindset and we think the way that you think. I like to redefine mindset because mind is your whole energetic field. It's your whole body. Mind is way more than in your brain. There's enough brain cells in your gut for there to be a cat-sized brain in your belly. So when I talk about mindset, I'm talking about the intelligence of your entire body.
Yeah.
And your ability to be self-aware and aware of yourself in any area and any dimension. So that is inclusive of addressing the intelligence of your body. So it might be that you have a stomach pang, for example, or you're experiencing pain somewhere in your body. You might not cognitively even be aware of it, but that will instinctively pull you into cravings, into specific types of behavior that that make it so that you don't have to be aware, so they can continue to repress pain. And so we do two things in our coming of age. We either suppress things, which is a conscious pushing down of experiences that we don't want to have, which we do through eating a lot. A lot of people have this. It's not even people who are institutionalized as having eating disorders. It's many people who have a very bad relationship with food.
Yeah.
We also repress, which is unconsciously pushing things down, which we also do with food, but it has a different flavor to it. So if you have memories from your childhood that you don't remember because you've repressed them, you might eat in a specific way that would make it really, really hard for you to ever have that memory come up to the surface. And all of this occurs without your thought process ever being involved.
Yeah. So are you saying that it's important to be able to find words, to put language to this belief system, to the behaviors, I should say, put language to the behaviors so that they can be truthfully, authentically expressed? And then we can change the narrative.
I think it's a very, very helpful stepping stone. It is not required. And I like to distinguish between transformation and transcendence. And our birthright is transcendence. We are here to make quantum leaps
Okay.
in consciousness. That's our purpose here. And if you have been raised in addiction and abuse and neglect, or a form of normalization that makes it really difficult for you to see where any change is even necessary, for example, all of those, I would say, are the same bucket. You kind of need stepping stones or a ladder to take you to where you need to go. And those come in the form of tools.
Yeah. So
And
building a bridge.
yeah, and effectively what that's really doing between you and I and everyone listening um, is to offer a distraction for something that's actually very, very simple, but feels really far away when embarking on a change endeavor of any kind. If you just knew how to completely get out of your own way, you would change. It's natural. That's a natural occurrence that would happen. our bodies change cellular structure on a minute by minute
Yeah.
basis. And that is true of everything. But the issue is that we are such habitual creatures that we need to break the habit of making habits in order to allow change to occur. And so what I like to do is give people good habits that put them in a predisposition to allow change to naturally occur. And that is to develop language for your internal experience.
Right.
Because the first level of sovereignty that we want to reach to is intellectual sovereignty, which is to be able to speak on behalf of and be emotionally mature enough to share what's going on for us,
Right.
which is really important for our human stuff, like relating and jobs and, kids and all of those things. And then the next level is emotional sovereignty, is you can feel and be with your feelings regardless of where you are in the world. And a lot of people shut down their emotional landscape the second they walk into an office, for example, because they've decided that that part of themselves is not welcome.
Yeah. And also give yourself permission to not need to be so positive all the time. It's okay to acknowledge that things aren't going well. It's okay to acknowledge the negative feelings.
Right. It's
Um,
incredibly vulnerable, but it is extremely important um, to a transcendental journey to not have it look perfect all the time, because that is just not reality.
yeah.
Reality is not always perfect. Reality is often very flawed. And so that's one of the reasons why these tools are so valuable, is if you give someone a list of feelings and a list of needs, which I use with every single one of my clients, they may recognize 75% of the words on that list, but in terms of what's instinctively available for them when they're in an activated state, they have like 3 or 4 words.
Mhm.
And so teaching someone how to be very specific about what they're feeling allows them to pinpoint inside of their body what's really going on and let it go. And of course, there is a point where your capacity to consciously register what you're feeling in your body extends beyond the number of words that there is in any given language. And the English language happens to have a lot of words to describe emotional experiences compared to, like, I speak Danish, I live in Denmark. They have 1/6 the number of words in
Really?
Denmark that English does. So I often feel very frustrated in Danish because I'm very eloquent in English.
Yes, you are.
And so to describe my reality in Danish feels really limiting to me. So you imagine a Dane growing up with so few words to describe their experience, that has an impact on how someone behaves and how someone treats themselves, because they don't have words to describe what they're looking for.
Yeah, and I would imagine that also impacts, well, a few things, but it impacts the ability to set boundaries, right?
Definitely.
And then also it impacts our ability to receive, because if we're not open to expressing what we need, I just find in my experience personally and professionally, truthfully, with people that I work with, that there's an innate um, inability to be open to receiving what you need to receive. And when we're walking around and existing in this contracted state, then there's no hope for receiving. The heart is closed, the soul is closed. I feel it as I'm talking about it. But when we take that deep breath and we open ourselves to accepting with compassion what we need to,
Right.
then we can receive. So, how would you explore this?
Receiving is the core of everything. Everything comes down to how much, how fast, how easily can you receive? How open is your heart? How available are you for the change you say you want so badly?
Mhm.
How available are you for the relationship you say you want? How available are you for the career or the job you say you want? It it is the core of everything, is whether or not we can allow love in. Most relationships fail because one or both parties have a hard time receiving the other person. And emotional intelligence is the language of the heart. And so you're not going to feel the language of the heart and have any accuracy to what you're experiencing if you're closed off.
Right.
And so the first step, which is always the most vulnerable one, it's just like the first step of changing your physical features is to, you know, change the way you eat and walk into a gym potentially. It's the same. You have to open your heart first and trust. This is a key piece. And
Yeah.
this is one of the reasons why, you know, in recovery work, before you go through all of your resentment, the step before that is accepting God as the sort of maker of your life. And, you know, people who have issues with religion really struggle with that step, because to open your heart and be willing to walk in the world as a feeling being, as a sentient being,
Mhm.
is incredibly vulnerable.
Yeah.
And
It's
you
funny.
have to
I'm
go ahead.
sorry for interrupting, but you know, this brings up something for me personally in my own recovery journey.
Right,
I had trouble giving my power up to something greater than myself.
right.
What I discovered and what worked for me was that my higher power was my deepest sense of self.
Yeah.
For me, the higher power meant connecting to that part of me that was willing to receive what I needed to receive, that was
Mm,
willing to sit in the discomfort and sit there long enough to ask the questions and continue to sit there long enough to hear the answers. And when I was able to connect to that deepest part of myself, the fear went away
mhm.
and it became this overwhelming sense of love and trust. And I don't mean love in the romantic sense, I mean just the opposite of fear.
Infinite universal love.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and that for me was the awakening. That for me was the knowing.
Mm,
And I believe that on some level that's what attracts me to your work and everything we're talking about,
yeah.
because that's what it took for me. It didn't work for me to connect to something outside of myself, because
No, me
the truth
neither.
is my eating disorder reflected that I was giving my power up to something outside of myself. I was
Mm.
giving my power up to a scale. I was giving myself power up to what I thought my image in the world needed to be.
I love what you just said. I have chills. Whew. It's this is the most common confusion about power and about love and about the universe. And I like to correct people is like the universe is in here.
Yeah.
And when you're willing to go deep down to the bottom of the barrel, that's where you find it. Is you go so far in that you almost turn inside out. You do
Hmm.
turn inside out. And
Yes.
then you're walking around in the world as a naked, fully integrated being.
Right.
And that is when you develop um, the skill, the internal instinctive skill to transmute painful experiences into pleasurable ones, for example, and to perpetually transform. And it is not about finding anything outside of yourself. It's not about surrendering from a place of victimhood to some God power. It is truly about recognizing the power you have moving through your own body, and the responsibility that of course goes with that, recognizing that taking responsibility is the ultimate liberation, because once you realize that you've created everything, you can let go of it and you get to be in the presence of transpersonal power everywhere you go.
Yeah.
And I think that is, I love that you added that, because it's so true. And it's, you know, people have a really hard time with the word faith, and it is essential to any change. You, because if you're going to create a new reality for yourself that you've never lived before, that no one in your life has ever lived before, you're going to have faith that it exists before you create the evidence of it.
That's very true, because otherwise you wouldn't enter into the journey.
Right. Yeah,
You know,
exactly.
unfortunately for most, and I was one of those, it took hitting bottom. It took becoming physically, emotionally, and spiritually bankrupt. It
Mm,
took the threat of losing everything that was dearest to me,
yeah.
um, for me to even be willing. And I don't know that I was so willing in the beginning to put myself in that place. You know, there's a difference between being ready and being willing. It's a very big difference. We all come to the idea of recovery ready, right? We know that we're involved in this insanity, and it's time to move forward. But being willing is a whole different thing, and that brings us to the whole thing of receiving. Because if we're not receiving, and as you so beautifully metaphorically described, right, it's how we digest, absorb, and metabolize life.
Right.
And that's reflected in how we digest, absorb, and metabolize food.
Yes, actually, absolutely. It is, you know, this is, there's so many ways in which you can connect to your own power using the experiences that you've already had. And I think that those who have experiences with starving themselves or purging or feeling constipated or backed up, and having that be, and this was my experience, this is why one of the reasons why it came up when you and I first talked is I had that experience. I felt very emotionally backed up, but I associated it with my diet for a really, really long time. And once I cleared out my dietary stuff and still recognized that the feeling was there, I then had a new way of looking at it through my emotional landscape. But in one sense, it wasn't the first time I looked at it, because I had already done one stripping away of the layer by working with the way that I am with food. And then I had done another layer of it by working with the way I'm with my body and in my yoga practice and doing weightlifting and like all these other ways of working with your physical self. And so then you have a guideline for how your body metabolizes, digests, what you need in order to avoid constipation, what nutrients you need in your life.
Yes.
In order to optimize this alchemical master that we are attached to.
I mean, it's so true. You know, you can talk about nutrient deficiencies, but I haven't met a person who was nutrient deficient that wasn't also deficient in some area of their lives.
Yeah.
You know, and that's, I know, a very big part of the work we do. You know, a very trusted mentor of mine taught us that eating is only half the story of good nutrition. It's who we are as eaters that's the other half. And that when we can address how we eat, why we eat, that's the big one, when we eat, the what has a funny way of taking care of itself.
Totally.
Because we're so connected. And when we're, as you so beautifully put it, and I'll keep repeating it forever, absorbing, digesting, and metabolizing everything that we're bringing to the table of life, so to speak, then what we are literally bringing to the table is better absorbed, metabolized, and digested.
Yeah. I want to use an example, and I want to preface this example with saying I am not a doctor. I'm sure you have to say that a lot. I have several years ago, prior to my whole awakening journey starting, I grew up very, very sick. I got sicker, and then I got a little healthy, and then I started having major health issues again in about 6 or 7 years ago. And one of the ways that I was exploring how to resolve this was I got genetic testing done, which I found to be very fascinating and extraordinarily helpful. And one of the results that came back was that I'm very bad at metabolizing vitamin D, which is true for a lot of people. People have single or double mutations on a particular gene, and it makes it really challenging for them to get it through their diet. And so they definitely need it through their skin, to get vitamin D through their skin. And I believe that everything is connected. And so for me, it's really, really helpful to not just ask, how can I consume more vitamin D, which I did. I started taking, between 5 and 10,000 IUs of vitamin D every day. And it certainly made a difference. But one of the things that I found over the course of the 2 years that I was really stringently going into this is that my levels didn't actually change. My levels were still quite low. And I was like, how is it that I'm taking so much vitamin D and my body's still not taking this in? And if you really strip it away and say, what is vitamin D? Where does it come from? It comes from light.
Yeah.
It comes from light. It comes through food that has been in light, and it comes from light directly.
Right.
And I can tell you that during the time that I was struggling the most with this, I did not have enough light in my life.
Yeah. Metaphorically, figuratively.
Metaphorically, poetically,
Yeah. Yeah.
figuratively. Literally, I lived also in Scandinavia, but I actually think that had the least to do with it. It had the least to do with it because since my early 20s, I've also spent a month of every year near the equator because I've known that I've also needed my skin to be in the sun. I feel like I get a reboot when that happens. But the only thing that changed my vitamin D levels was allowing more love into my life.
Right.
And
Opening it.
now I take less vitamin D and
That's
my
right.
levels are normal.
Yeah. Exactly.
And I believe it's because of my spiritual and emotional evolution that has occurred. This is why I say I'm not a doctor. Please don't expect this if you're listening to this, but like, I think it's always valuable to consider these other angles and these other dimensions.
Yes.
You know, like if you're humped over in your back, like what burden are you carrying? It can't just be because your spine is out of alignment. Like that's one aspect of it, but you have to address it from all angles in order for you to heal.
Yeah. What you just described is the perfect illustration of why I wanted to bring this summit to life. To introduce a functional paradigm. And by functional paradigm, I mean the philosophy that all systems of the body are connected, that we are not our symptoms. Our symptoms are messages calling for our attention. And that not only are all systems of the body connected, but everyone is unique.
Yeah.
And on top of that, everything matters. So that speaks to our deficiencies. Where are we deficient? Not only nutritionally, but in our lives. And light is, again, it's figurative, it's literal, but we all need to walk around with a lightness of being. And when we have that lightness of being, our bodies become lighter. And you know what? When I say our bodies become lighter, I'm not talking about the size of our bodies, because I know that there are people with us today who are struggling with restrictive eating disorders. That's
Right.
where I was. But I was carrying this burden around and connecting to that sense of self, or whatever your higher power means for you. I certainly didn't mean to infer that I don't believe that people have the right or the ability to connect to that higher power. Whatever higher power speaks to you, I was just describing what speaks to me. But that lightness of being has nothing to do with the size of your body. It has to do with the size of your presence on this blessed earth. And that's what we all want to expand upon. And that's how we
I want to break that down.
Yeah, please.
Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I want to break that down because it's so easy to misinterpret what you just said.
Yeah, it is.
One of the things when I talk about it, and I'm sure because you and I are using very similar language that you mean the same thing. When you talk about letting light in and being light, it doesn't have to do with your weight. It has to do with your density.
Ah,
And when I say letting light in, what I actually mean is um, revealing more parts of you into the light, into the daylight, which is to say, being more fully expressed and not only showing a part of yourself and allowing everything else to remain hidden or negated.
so
So when
I'm sorry, it's expressed and exposed.
yeah, expressed and exposed. And one of the reasons why so many people don't want to do it is because it feels exposing.
Yes.
And so I like to use the word reveal, because if we are all here as powerful, unique beings, our full expression is precisely what we're here to share with the planet. And so the sooner we can get right with all of us being welcome everywhere we go and being at home in ourselves, in our bodies, which is one of the things that I talk about a lot, that is letting light in. It's not pulling something from outside and putting it inside of you. It's not like taking a flashlight from the hardware store and putting it inside of your esophagus. That's not like, I think that's what a lot of people think. Like when you let light in, oh, I'm just going to let the light in. And then you kind of become a spiritually bypassing spiritual person who is actually not self-expressing in an authentic and real way. And that is a really, really important thing to pair with what you and I have just been talking about, so that the listeners and anyone who gets their hands on this understands that the goal here is to free yourself from the burden of believing that all of you is not welcome everywhere you go. And in that, the density of heaviness that we feel stuck in our bodies and whatever it is, it loosens up, and we become more agile, and we become more free to express in real time, not having to think about the right way to do things, because our intuition already knows, and we suppress our intuition in favor of looking outside of ourselves. And the exact opposite is what's needed. We need to allow more of ourselves out, and that's our essential selves, not our story about who we are.
Exactly. Oh,
So
thank you for that. It was great clarification. Really,
yes.
really wonderful. So, how does one even begin the journey of feeling more connected? You know, are there tools? Is there self-talk? Is it more about letting go than what we can do?
I think all of it, my experience is that all of it is rooted in awareness,
Yeah,
not effort.
yeah,
So if you start immediately thinking, oh, I'm really inspired by this conversation, I'm going to go do it, press the pause button
yes,
first. Because the more aware you allow yourself to be, awareness is a byproduct of receiving. So step one is receive yourself. And so for this audience, I would say one of the most powerful exercises that I could recommend is to, when this call is over, go stand in front of a mirror naked and take yourself in and listen to where you judge yourself and love yourself for your judgment, and don't look away. Because being willing to see yourself is a fundamental step of any change. You have to know where you are in order to know where you're going. You might not like your body, but if you listen to the way that you talk to yourself, your heart might break. And that would be a good thing, because if you allow yourself to talk that way to yourself, you can imagine that you're going to have habits that match that. You're going to have an environment of people around you who match that. And that's where it has to start changing. It has to start changing at home. And being willing to see yourself for your beauty, that's a daily practice. That's a daily practice, to look in the mirror and to say good things about who you are at your core. And also not just focus on your physical features, because some of us, myself included, carry around a body that is representative of the trauma, not necessarily of where I'm going. It is, there are certain things about my body that I will never be able to change, because they're put in place long before I had a spiritual awakening. And to learn to love all aspects of you and what they represent in terms of what you have received from them is a really, really important exercise. But to truly allow yourself to be aware and recognize that that matters, and to not go through the world thinking that all of this is an accident. Everything is on purpose. Everything is for you. And if you can start there, I say that's a really, really powerful exercise that it could take months for someone to really go through deeply and be with, because there's intention in everything.
yeah. That's really beautiful. Really beautiful. And as much as we've talked about, I feel like we've only scratched the surface. I would want to share with our audience something you so brilliantly wrote recently. If we want to make progress, having these self-awareness tools embodied is an essential part of the job. We create long-term change in one of three ways: by association, by receiving feedback, by observation. We cannot simply commit something to memory after hearing about it once and then never touch upon it again. For the same reason, having an awakening does not exactly mean much until you embody it. Do you have any final thoughts to expand on this?
Yes, practice is everything, and it's an honor to practice.
Yeah.
And you can hear something and say, oh, that's a really great idea. But where we build our resilience is in our practice, because you need to actually take those tools and put them out in the world, which is to say, you in the world, in order for it to land somewhere where it can be utilized instinctively later. And there are a lot of people who've had really beautiful insights and illuminations in their life who are still doing nothing because the fear of taking that first step is more than people can bear. And my advice is to feel the fear and do it anyway, because you build so much resilience in going forward with your vision of yourself, regardless of whether or not you have any permission and approval from your current environment. And you might realize very quickly, and this is a very, very humbling part of the transformational journey, that you have created an environment that is designed to keep you down and keep you small and keep you unexpressed. And that could mean that you have to abandon your entire reality in order to be able to create a life that is in tune with who you actually are at your core. And most people stop there. Most people stop change work because they're terrified of leaving their loved ones who don't appreciate them and who are not kind and who are not doing their own work. And sometimes it's important to sever relationships that are unhealthy and that where both partners are not committed to change, so that you can make room in your life for the people and the environment and the job and the lifestyle that suits you for what you are here to do, to be of service. So this isn't about pushing away people who truly want to be in your life and are willing and who don't match some judgment you have. This is really about putting up boundaries and not allowing dysfunctional relating to infiltrate your vision for yourself.
Yeah, that's so beautifully said, because the truth is that while we do sometimes need to let go of relationships that no longer serve, and that's daunting for a lot of people, the process can be a bit lonely, but you're never alone or lonely when you know that you can come home to yourself.
That's totally right. Absolutely.
Oh, and I have loved this conversation so much, so very much. I am so grateful for you. I'm grateful for the work that you bring to the world and the time that you've given us. So just how can our audience find you?
I am on all of the social medias.
Okay.
And I'm the only Antesa. So if you put in Antesa Jensen, you'll very quickly follow or find me, and you can follow me on Instagram and follow me on Facebook. My website is antesajensen.com. And one of the things that I particularly love about my website is that there's lots of videos, and there's also tons of podcast interviews and articles that I've written, and a huge blog. So if you're interested in my content and what I have to share, my website's a really great place to go hang out.
That's great. And all of that information will be on Antesa's speaker page. So don't worry if you didn't catch it all.
Oh, and I have a little freebie.
Yes.
Also, if you go to my website under resources, I believe, I have a worksheet that I handed out. I used to have it for a workshop that I did with TEDx, around navigating your belief systems. And since we talked so much about that on this call, I think it's really relevant for your crew to explore what it is that you're telling yourself and how you dismantle these belief systems. There are 10 steps to it, and you just put in your email address and it'll come to you via email. And it is a very valuable exercise, I found, and I've gotten lots of good feedback on it. So I hope that it will serve you as well. And we can also include that in the show notes.
Absolutely. Again, thank you. And thank you, audience. And I want you to be sure to grab your all access pass, because I don't want you to miss even one of these impactful conversations. I'm Mindy Gorman-Plutzer, your host, bringing you root cause resolution and functional solutions so you can stop fearing food and say goodbye to your disordered eating for good.